Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Shannon's Shelf. So I'm Shannon, and it's been weird. I tend to make videos on stuff that I've just read, like recently, and so perhaps this wouldn't normally qualify. But I read Lord of the Rings for the first time ever earlier this year, before I had this channel. So either way, but I read it in late winter, early spring, all three books that is. And actually later this year, and I have made a video on this channel about that, I read more Tolkien. I read The Children of Húrin, I read Beren and Luthien, Fall of Numenor, The Fall of Gondolin. It's been a great Tolkien year for me. Now, would I say Tolkien is my favorite author of all time? I don't know if I would. I haven't really thought about it. Probably not. But I think he would be up there as far as greatest fantasy author of all time for me. Not that I'm super well read in fantasy. Probably at this point, yeah. And it wasn't like I was going in totally clueless. I know who Tolkien is. My twin brother is a huge Tolkien nerd. I knew a lot of this information for years, like the stuff you don't get in the films. I've seen the films every year at least for the last 10 plus years. I watch the films all the time. And I love the films. Part of me was like, I don't need to read the books. I know what's missing from the films and, is actually in the books because my brothers told me. Yeah, I was a fool. I should have read the books way earlier. I read them earlier this year. We're getting towards the end of the year now, of course. And I just can't get it out of my mind. I loved Lord of the Rings. I loved reading Lord of the Rings. Now, that is a really popular opinion. And I think that's fine. I think a lot of things that are popular pop culture, lots of those things actually I do not think are very good. I can be relatively an elitist. And Tolkien might be part of the elitist fantasy, like the elitist stuff you like if you're a fantasy fan, but he is also just he's super popular. And I think he's one of those guys that is super popular that is pretty deserved. Now, is he perfect? No. And I mean Lord of the Rings was way better than all the other stuff I read. And I would say Lord of the Rings is probably the best. With that being said, I have not read The Silmarillion, and there's been a couple other tales and stuff that I've not read. But of course, I've read The Hobbit. I'm currently reading The Hobbit, actually, again. But Lord of the Rings is amazing. I have never read George R.R. Martin. I know a lot of people love that guy and the Game of Thrones. And some people, I think, appreciate his willing to be grimy and dirty and show the really hideous sides of humanity, and that's fair. And I don't think Tolkien necessarily ignores that stuff either. It's not what he brings our attention to in many ways, but at the same time, we know things are really bad. Things really suck, or else we wouldn't be feeling so great when we win at the end, right? But I think, if anything, what it largely comes down, at least is my understanding, of course, is that he focuses more on the love to appease the suffering, not necessarily on blind optimism. And I feel like it could be relatively easy to get an optimistic feel from reading Lord of the Rings, but I think love and friendship is a huge thing for me. And just natural beauty, not necessarily being a fan of the machine. If anything, I read Lord of the Rings and it almost feels anti-capitalistic in many ways. Not necessarily that I would say it's pro-Marxism or anything. It's very much in line with, it seems to me at least, a Christian Platonism. And I am not a Christian Platonist. But I'm not against it necessarily. Like, it's fine. I love Lord of the Rings, and if Lord of the Rings is the ultimate Christian Platonist work, then it can't be that bad, right? So, I uh, I find Tolkien so refreshing in a modern world, and while it's refreshing compared to lots of modern works, it is very much still a modern story. Like, Frodo gets out of this all banged up, shell shocked essentially, right? PTSD. Like, this guy is never going to be the same. This is not heroic in many ways. There are some heroic characters. I think Aragorn would probably be a pretty heroic character, right? But it's not hunky dory, happy go lucky, singing kumbaya stuff. There are things that are super awesome and happy, but, and it's mostly at the end, right? That we get that huge payoff. But it's terrifying. Things suck. Things look really bad. People die. That is one thing I actually love about Tolkien. Is he's willing to kill people because that's how the world is. And I think a lot of other authors do this too. Hollywood has a tendency to avoid this, I think, in some regards. People just want a feel-good movie, and it's like, I don't know. I think the movies that make me feel the best are the ones that kind of suck, like in a sense of like, oh, not that they kind of suck, but I mean like some part of the story, part of the trial is really terrible, and it feels that much more rewarding at the end. If you don't suffer, you don't learn. That's pretty much how the world is anyway. And everybody shies away from suffering. Don't get me wrong, I do it too, but it's necessary. Essentially, it's essential. And Tolkien, I feel like, displays that so well. And it's not only a love for these characters have for each other and love for nature, like I said, it's that he loves this. You could tell. He's putting himself, his own mythos into this. Uh, and it makes the story so much more enrapturing. I've read a fair amount, an okay amount, of other high epic, whatever, classical fantasy. I can't love the world as much as I can for Tolkien. Now, part of that definitely has to do with my exposure, the length of my exposure with Tolkien, even if I only read it for the first time a few months ago. But I can feel like he loves the world, and it's not like he's just saying on a page, "I love this world that I made," like really, really a lot, or anything. You could tell that he does, and it kind of rubs off on you. At least it rubs off on me. And so, my suggestion is read Lord of the Rings. This isn't particularly about reading any other stuff, although I would say Children of Húrin is amazing. And I can't say watch Rings of Power. I never even watched the second season, although I've heard it's better than the first season. Let me know down in the comments if that is true, if that's your thoughts on it. But read it. Honestly, read it. It's so much better than the movies. The movies are great. Peter Jackson did an excellent job with those films. I mean, hats off to him, right? The books are just so good. They're so good. They're so enveloping, so engulfing, so full of love and trial, hardship, but they're so worth it. To be honest, I've been finding the urge to just reread them already. I might try to reread them once a year. I'm not sure it's going to be an every year thing, just because life. But I'm definitely going to make sure that they're an every few year thing, right? And I'll still be watching the movies. They're pretty easy, just a few hours as opposed to at least a few days of reading. But either way, I've been Shannon, and I'm sure I'll talk more about Tolkien at some point. If you're interested in hearing that, feel free to subscribe. Also appreciate liking and commenting, of course, your own thoughts. And I make plenty of other videos on whatever else it is that I'm reading. I do read other fantasy, but also nonfiction, literary fiction, and whatever I feel like. So, again, if you're interested in any of that, feel free to subscribe. You just have to put it with looking at my face, pretty much. I think that might be manageable. I don't know. But appreciate it if you got it this far, especially. And I will see you guys next time. Please have a good one.